My name is Samuel O'Connell. I feel it is important to state that plainly, to anchor myself to the person I was before I came here. Names have power, and I find myself clinging to mine as a man overboard might cling to a piece of driftwood. I am 24 years old, and I hold a master's degree in library and information science from the University of Toronto. I chose that field for its quiet, its sense of order. I find profound comfort in the Dewey Decimal System, in the logical arrangement of human knowledge into a coherent, accessible structure. Everything has a place, and there is a system for finding it. My life, until recently, was governed by this love for rational, predictable systems. That life ended 3 months ago. My mother, a woman who raised me on her own with a fierce and boundless love, was diagnosed with a particularly aggressive, fast-acting variant of motor neuron disease. The doctors used terms like rapidly degenerative and no known cure. There was, however, an experimental treatment protocol being trialed in the United States. It was not a cure, but it offered a chance, a slim, astronomically expensive chance, to slow the disease's relentless march. It was, of course, not covered by our provincial health plan. I liquidated every asset I had. I sold my car, my collection of first edition books that I had so carefully curated, and cashed in the bonds my grandparents had left for me. I started online fundraisers and pleaded with distant relatives. It was a drop in an ocean of debt. The initial cost for the treatment was a figure so large it seemed abstract, unreal. I was faced with a simple, brutal equation without a significant, immediate infusion of cash. My mother would die. The systematic, logical world I had built for myself crumbled into dust, replaced by the singular, desperate need to defy that outcome. It was in this state of mind, scrolling through the dregs of the internet at 3 in the morning, that I found it. The job posting was on a website that looked like a relic from the dial-up era, a stark, text-only page for something called remote hospitality and caretaking. The listing was for a night manager, the Pine Tree Rest Motel. The location was vague, somewhere deep in the unorganized territories of northern Ontario. The duties were standard guest check-in, light maintenance, nightly security. But the salary was anything but standard. It was an impossible number, paid weekly, in cash. Accommodation was included. It felt like a scam, a lure for human trafficking, or worse. But when I looked at the most recent photo of my mother, her hand trembling as she tried to lift a teacup, I knew I had no other choice. I filled out the application. I received a response within the hour. It was an email instructing me to be available for a phone call the following day. No specific time was given, just an assurance that they would call when it was opportune. The call came the next afternoon. There was no sound of ringing, just a sudden, faint click and a voice on the line, as if he had been listening the entire time. "Mr. O'Connell." The voice was male, cultured, and unnervingly calm. It was a voice that seemed polished smooth, with no emotional texture whatsoever. It was like listening to a synthesized voice, trying to perfectly mimic a human one. "Yes, this is he." I managed my own voice tight with anxiety. "This is Mr. Sterling," the voice said. "I am calling regarding your application for the position at the Pine Tree Rest." I waited for the standard interview questions. My experience, my skills, my references. None came. Instead, there was a long pause, filled only with a faint, whispering static on the line. "Mr. O'Connell." He began again, his tone unchanged. "Do you believe that some places, like some people, have a right to their privacy?" The question caught me completely off guard. I suppose so. Yes. And are you capable of following instructions to the letter, Mr. O'Connell? Even if those instructions seem counter-intuitive or lack an immediate, discernible logic. This was the core of it. This was the real interview. My desperation gave me the answer he needed. My personal feelings about a task are relevant. If I am given instructions, I will follow them. Exactly. Another pause, longer this time. The static on the line seemed to deepen, to form itself into faint, sibilant whispers just at the edge of my hearing. Very good. Mr. Sterling said finally. The position is yours. A contract will be delivered to your email address momentarily. It is a simple document. It stipulates your salary and your primary duty, which is absolute adherence to the manager's protocol. A list of these protocols will be provided for you on site. Your first week's pay will be waiting for you as well. We expect your arrival within 48 hours. Before I could ask a single question, the line went dead. A moment later, an email appeared in my inbox. The contract was a single page, as he'd said. It was Spartan, almost crude, but legally binding. It mentioned the salary, the accommodation, and a single, heavily bolded clause. The employee agrees to follow the manager's protocol. The standing orders without deviation or question. Violation of the protocol will result in immediate termination of this agreement and forfeiture of all compensation. I signed it electronically and sent it back. I packed a single suitcase, visited my mother in the care facility, and lied to her. I told her I'd found a high-paying archivist job for a private collector in the north. That I'd be out of contact for a while, but would send money. The look of relief on her face was all I needed to silence the screaming alarms in my own head. The drive north was a journey of erasure. First, the sprawling suburbs of Toronto gave way to farmland, then to the rugged granite and dense forests of the Canadian Shield. The 4-lane highway narrowed to 2, then to a single, winding strip of asphalt that seemed to be slowly surrendering to the encroaching wilderness. My phone's signal bars dwindled one by one until the "no service" icon appeared, a definitive digital severing. I was alone. The sheer, oppressive emptiness of the landscape was breathtaking and terrifying. The sky was a vast, indifferent gray canvas, and the endless walls of pine trees on either side of the road felt less like scenery and more like silent, watching sentinels. After 6 hours of driving, following the crude map provided in the email, I saw it. The Pine Tree Rest. It wasn't the dilapidated horror movie shack I had half expected. It was a classic 1970s era motor lodge, a single-story L-shaped building with 12 rooms and a small, detached office at the front. What was unsettling was its condition. It was immaculate. The white paint on the walls was pristine. The dark green trim on the doors and windows looked freshly applied. The gravel of the parking lot was raked into smooth, even lines. There were no weeds, no peeling paint, no signs of decay. This level of maintenance in such a remote location felt profoundly wrong. An unnatural imposition of order on a place that should be succumbing to entropy. The air was heavy and still, thick with the clean, sharp scent of pine and something else underneath it, a cold, sterile smell like ozone after a lightning strike. The office door was unlocked. Inside, the sense of unnatural cleanliness continued. The linoleum floor shone. The wood-paneled walls were dust-free, and the countertop was polished to a dull gleam. On that counter sat 3 items, a single, old-fashioned brass key for the manager's quarters behind the office, a thick, crisp manila envelope with my name on it, and a single, white laminated card. I opened the envelope first. Inside was the exact amount of cash promised for a week's salary, all in crisp, new one, $100 bills. The sheer reality of the money was a balm to my frayed nerves. This was real. I could help my mother. Whatever strangeness came with it, I could endure it for this. Then, I picked up the laminated card. It was titled in stark black block letters. Manager's Protocol, the Standing Orders 1. All cleaning and maintenance of vacant rooms must be completed between sunrise and sunset. No exceptions. 2. The front office door must be locked at precisely 1100 p.m. It cannot be opened for any reason until sunrise. 3. The television in the office must remain on from midnight until 400 a.m., tuned to a static channel. Do not lower the volume below a noticeable hum. 4. If a guest requests room 7, do not make eye contact. Accept their payment without examination, provide the key, and say nothing more than, "Enjoy your stay." Lock the office door immediately after they leave. 5. You will find a thermos of black coffee on the desk each morning. You must drink all of it before noon. Do not attempt to learn who delivers it. 6. Never under any circumstances enter the locked maintenance shed behind room 12. I read the list 3 times. My logical, librarian, trained mind immediately began searching for rational explanations. An eccentric owner, perhaps. A long-running prank played on new hires. The rules were bizarre, certainly, but not overtly threatening. They were tasks, instructions, and I had promised Mr. Sterling I could follow instructions. My first night was quiet. I settled into the small apartment behind the office, which was as clean and Spartan as the rest of the motel. I performed the mundane tasks of a manager, checking the boiler in the basement, ensuring the vacant rooms were clean and stocked. The silence of the place was absolute, broken only by the wind sighing through the towering pines. As midnight approached, I followed Rule 3, turning on the small television in the office and tuning it to a channel of hissing, dancing static. The low hum filled the small space, a strange, electronic heartbeat in the deep wilderness. I locked the front door at exactly 1100 p.m. I was trying to convince myself it was all a game when the headlights cut through the darkness. A car, a vintage model I couldn't quite place, long and black like a hearse, crunched slowly across the gravel and parked directly in front of the office. A figure emerged. A man, tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in a dark, old-fashioned suit that seemed to absorb the faint light from the office window. He walked to the door and knocked. A single, sharp rap. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was after 1100 p.m. Rule 2 was clear. But he wasn't asking to come in. He was standing at the check-in window, a small sliding glass pane set into the wall. I took a deep breath, stood up, and slid the window open. "Room 7, the man said. His voice was a dry, rasping whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. Rule 4 slammed into the forefront of my mind. Do not make eye contact. I stared intently at the countertop, my gaze fixed on a small knot in the wood grain. I saw his hand slide into view, long and pale, with fingers that seemed just a little too long. He placed something on the counter. I took the key for room 7 from its hook, slid it across the counter towards his hand, and recited the line from the protocol. "Enjoy your stay." His hand retracted, taking the key. He said nothing. I watched his shadowy form turn and walk away, his steps making no sound on the gravel. The moment he was clear of the office, I slammed the sliding window shut and locked it. Then, as per the rule, I double-checked the main office door's lock. My hands were shaking. A profound, bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the night air washed over me. I stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the static and the frantic beating of my own heart. Curiosity is a powerful, dangerous thing. My mind screamed at me to leave it alone, to just sit out the night and not think about it. But I couldn't. I had to know. Slowly, I lowered my gaze to the countertop, to the spot where the tall man had left his payment. It wasn't money. It wasn't a credit card. It was a single, perfect feather. It was long and glossy, the color of polished jet, shimmering faintly in the dim light. A raven's feather. And in that silent, sterile office, surrounded by the vast, listening darkness of the Ontario wilderness, I understood. This was not a prank. These were not the eccentricities of a strange old man. The rules were real, and I had just successfully completed my first transaction at the Pine Tree Rest. Sleep did not come easily after my encounter with the guest for room 7. I sat in the manager's apartment, the raven feather lying on the small table beside me, a stark, black slash against the pale wood. It felt heavy, imbued with a significance my rational mind couldn't process. Every rustle of pine needles against the window, every groan of the building settling, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. The world I had known, a world of predictable systems and verifiable facts, had been peeled back to reveal something else. Something ancient and patient and utterly indifferent to human reason. When the first hint of dawn finally broke the oppressive darkness, it felt less like a sunrise and more like a reprieve. I had survived the night. I checked the parking lot. The long black car was gone. So was the guest. I felt a desperate urge to check room 7 to see what state it was in, but Rule 1 was explicit. All cleaning and maintenance of vacant rooms must be completed between sunrise and sunset. The sun was not yet fully above the horizon. I had to wait. The rules were my new reality, my new system. The Dewey Decimal System of survival. I walked back into the office, my body aching with exhaustion and tension. And there, sitting squarely in the middle of the polished countertop, was a large, stainless steel thermos. It hadn't been there when I'd locked myself in the apartment. A cold dread, now becoming familiar, trickled down my spine. Rule 5D. You will find a thermos of black coffee on the desk each morning. You must drink all of it before noon. Do not attempt to learn who delivers it. I approached it cautiously, as if it were a venomous snake. It was warm to the touch. Unscrewing the cap released a plume of steam and the rich, dark aroma of strong coffee. There was no note, no sign of who had left it. The office was a sealed box, yet here it was. I poured a cup. The liquid was black as pitch. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it drugged? Poisoned? But the contract was clear, absolute adherence. And my mother's face, pale and hopeful, flashed in my mind. I raised the cup and drank. The coffee was bitter, strong, and shockingly good. It jolted me awake, clearing the fog of my sleepless night with an unnatural efficiency. I felt a strange, focused energy spread through me. I drank the entire thermos before the clock on the wall read 800 a.m. The sun was fully up now. It was time to clean room 7. My hands trembled slightly as I selected the key from the board. I walked the short distance across the raked gravel, the morning air crisp and clean. I unlocked the door and pushed it open, bracing myself for, I don't know what. A scene of carnage. Some arcane symbol scrawled on the walls. The room was perfect. It was pristine. The bed was made with military precision, the sheets turned down just so. The bathroom was spotless, the towels hung neatly on the rack. It was as if no one had ever been there. There was no sign of occupancy, no stray hair, no indentation on the pillow. The only thing out of place was the faint, lingering scent of ozone and dry leaves, the same scent that clung to the tall man. I cleaned the already clean room, my movement stiff and automatic, my mind reeling. I was a librarian cataloging a book that had no words, no pictures, only blank pages. The next week passed in a haze of this new, bizarre routine. Days were for cleaning the empty rooms, maintaining the unnaturally perfect grounds, and wiring the bulk of my cash payment to the account for my mother's treatment. Nights were for the office, for the low hum of the static-filled television, and for the rigid adherence to the rules. No other guests arrived. The pine tree rest sat silent and waiting. The thermos appeared each morning, and I drank the coffee without question. The raven feather remained on my table, a constant reminder of the nature of this place. On the second Monday of my employment, a week after my arrival, an email from Mr. Sterling appeared. Like the first, it simply materialized in my inbox without a notification sound. The subject line was, "Protocol Addendum." My blood ran cold. I opened it. The body of the email was as sparse and formal as his phone call. "Mr. O'Connell, please find below an updated list of standing orders. These are to be considered effective immediately. Your continued diligence is appreciated. Sincerely, Mr. Sterling." Attached was a new version of the laminated card, presented as a simple text file. The original 6 rules were there, but 3 new ones had been added. Manager's protocol, the standing orders, their revised 7. If you hear what sounds like a child crying outside after midnight, do not look and do not investigate. Immediately increase the volume of the television until the sound is no longer audible. 8. A supply truck will arrive every Tuesday at precisely 200 a.m. The loading bay door in the basement must be left unlocked on Monday nights. Do not approach the truck or the driver. After it departs, you must retrieve the delivery and stock the items in the appropriate rooms before sunrise. Do not inspect the contents beyond what is necessary for stocking. 9. If the exterior light above room 4 begins to flicker, you have less than 1 minute to enter the office and unplug the telephone from the wall jack. Do not plug it back in until the light is steady again. I stared at the new rules, a fresh wave of dread washing over me. These were different. They were more specific, more reactive. They implied threats that the first set of rules had only hinted at. A crying child, a mysterious delivery, a flickering light that necessitated cutting off communication with the outside world, a world I was already severed from. That very night, I learned the importance of Rule 7. I was in the office, the static hissing from the television, the hands of the clock creeping towards 100 a.m. Then I heard it. A faint, heartbreaking sound carried on the wind. It was the sound of a little girl sobbing, somewhere out in the darkness beyond the parking lot. "Mommy, I'm lost." Every decent instinct in my body screamed at me to go outside, to find the child, to help. It was a primal, human response. My hand was on the doorknob before I even realized I had stood up. But then the words of the rule echoed in my mind. Do not look and do not investigate. My fingers froze on the cold brass. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate. It sounded closer now, just outside the office window. "Please, it's so dark out here." My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vise. This was a test. A cruel, inhuman test. I thought of the contract, of the money, of my mother. With a surge of self-loathing, I turned away from the door and walked to the television. I cranked the volume knob. The hiss of the static grew into a roar. A deafening wall of white noise that filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards. It drowned out the sound of the crying child, replacing it with a clean, empty roar. I stood there shaking until the clock read 400 a.m. and the protocol allowed me to turn it off. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The next night was Tuesday. As instructed, I had left the basement loading bay door unlocked. I spent the hours after midnight in a state of high alert, my ears straining for the sound of the truck. At 200 a.m., precisely, I heard it, the low rumble of a heavy diesel engine and the crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights swept across the office windows, but I stayed put, my eyes fixed on the wall. I heard the squeal of air brakes, the clang of a heavy door, and then muffled thuds as items were unloaded. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. The engine rumbled back to life, and the truck drove away. I waited a full half hour before venturing down into the basement, my flashlight beam cutting through the damp, musty air. There, on the concrete floor of the loading bay, were 3 cardboard boxes. They bore no labels, no shipping information. Following Rule 8, I opened the first one. It was filled with small, white bars of soap, each one wrapped in plain, unmarked paper. The second box contained bottles of shampoo. The liquid inside was thick and had the color of crude oil. The third box held neatly folded towels. They were the softest towels I had ever felt, impossibly plush and pure white. I spent the next 2 hours before sunrise, dutifully stocking each room with the new supplies, my mind a whirlwind of unanswered questions. Who were these supplies for? The motel had no other guests. The week wore on. The light above room 4 remained steady. No one else came for room 7. I was beginning to fall into the rhythm of the place, the horror dulling into a kind of tense acceptance. This was my job. Follow the rules, get the money, save my mother. It was a simple, if terrifying, transaction. Then, on Friday night, a minivan pulled into the lot. It was a modern, family vehicle, caked in road dust. A man and a woman got out, followed by a young girl who looked about 10 years old. They looked tired, normal, and completely out of place. They were the first normal guests I had seen. The man came into the office. "A room for the night, please," he said, his voice wary. "Just one queen bed is fine. We've been driving all day." A wave of relief washed over me. A normal transaction. I took his credit card, ran it, and handed him a key for room 3. It felt good to do something so mundane. "Thanks," he said, taking the key. He paused at the door and looked back at me. "Just a quick question," he said, his expression unreadable. "Is the tall man still in room 7? We were told to wait until he had passed through." The air in my lungs turned to ice. The mundane moment shattered into a million sharp pieces. I stared at him, unable to form a response. The man's wary smile didn't change, but his eyes held a knowing, ancient quality that didn't belong in his tired, suburban dad face. "No matter," he said, his smile tightening slightly. "We'll be quiet. Wouldn't want to disturb the other guests." He turned and left, joining his wife and daughter and leading them towards room 3. I watched them go, my entire body numb. I was not a manager. I was not a caretaker. I was a station master on a line that ran to somewhere awful. A quiet facilitator for travelers who knew the schedule better than I did. The hum of the static from the television began its nightly duty, but it offered no comfort. It only sounded like it was laughing at me. The presence of the family in room 3 changed the texture of the silence. It was no longer an empty, waiting silence. It was a watchful one. I stayed in the office, my back to the wall, feeling like a specimen under glass. The family did not make a sound. No television, no raised voices, no noise at all. It was as if room 3 had simply swallowed them whole. My mind, the librarian's mind that craved order and explanation, was failing me. These guests were not on a road trip. They were pilgrims, and the Pine Tree Rest was a sacred, terrible stop on their journey. The tall man, the crying child, this quiet family. They were all part of a system I was paid to maintain, but never, ever understand. I spent the night cataloging the rules in my head, trying to impose some sense of order on them. There were preventative rules. Lock the door. Don't enter the shed. Reactive rules. The crying child, the flickering light, and procedural rules, the coffee, the check in for room 7. It was a liturgy of survival. My life had become a series of rituals performed to appease an unknown, unseen power. The salary, the reason I was here, felt less like payment and more like an offering given to me for my service. It was just after 300 a.m. when it happened. I was in my apartment, trying to read a paperback I'd brought with me, but the words were just black marks on the page. Through the thin wall connecting my quarters to the office, I could hear the constant, low hum of the television static. And then, through the window that faced the main lot, I saw it. A stutter in the pale yellow light that illuminated the walkway. The exterior light above room 4 was flickering. Rule 9E. If the exterior light above room 4 begins to flicker, you have less than 1 minute to enter the office and unplug the telephone from the wall jack. A jolt of pure, chemical panic shot through me. It was a physical blow. Less than 1 minute. I scrambled off the bed, fumbled with the door to the office, and burst through. The flickering was erratic, casting spastic, dancing shadows across the parking lot. The old rotary phone sat on the corner of the desk, a black, squat idol. It felt miles away. I lunged across the room. The cord was thick and old, plugged into a yellowed jack near the floorboards. My fingers, slick with sweat, struggled to get a grip on the plastic head. The flickering outside became more frantic, a rapid, desperate strobe. And then the phone rang. It wasn't a normal ring. It was a shrill, piercing shriek, a sound that felt like it was drilling directly into my skull. It was a sound of pure electronic agony. I yanked at the cord with all my strength. For a heart-stopping second, it held fast. The phone shrieked again, and in the space between the rings, I heard something come through the receiver. A voice. It was faint, distorted by static, but I knew it instantly. Samuel. It was my mother's voice. Samuel, why did you leave me here? It's so cold. With a final, desperate heave, the plug came free from the wall. The shriek cut off instantly. The office was plunged into a ringing, profound silence, broken only by the hum of the television and the frantic, ragged sound of my own breathing. I collapsed to the floor, the useless plastic plug clutched in my hand. The light outside stopped flickering and returned to its steady, sickly yellow glow. I don't know how long I lay there on the linoleum, shaking. The violation was absolute. This place, whatever it was, had reached into my life, into my heart, and used my deepest fear as a weapon. It knew me. The coffee I drank every morning, the name on my contract, it was all part of its system of knowledge. I was not an anonymous employee. I was a known quantity. The rest of the night passed without incident, but sleep was an impossibility. At sunrise, I watched from the office window as the family in room 3 emerged. They looked just as they had when they arrived. Weary, normal. The man loaded a small bag into their minivan, while the woman and the little girl stood by the door. As they were about to get in, the man looked over at the office and met my gaze directly. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that chilled me to the bone. Then he got in the van, and they drove away, leaving the gravel of the parking lot disturbed for the first time in weeks. As per my duties, I waited an hour before going to clean the room. Like room 7, it was almost perfectly tidy, but not quite. On the floor, next to the leg of the bed, was a small object. It was a little wooden bird, crudely carved from a single piece of pale wood, no bigger than my thumb. It was smooth to the touch, clearly worn by years of being held in a small hand. The little girl must have dropped it. I picked it up. It felt warm, innocent. A child's toy. A small, tangible piece of a normal world I was beginning to forget. I slipped it into my pocket, a secret talisman, against the encroaching madness of this place. I would keep it. It was a harmless act of defiance. That afternoon, another email from Mr. Sterling arrived. Subject: Protocol Addendum Hus. My stomach clenched. I was beginning to dread these messages more than the things they warned me about. Mr. O'Connell, your performance has been noted and is satisfactory. However, new circumstances require an expansion of your duties. Adherence is, as always, mandatory. Sincerely, Mr. Sterling. The list was longer this time. Manager's Protocol. The Standing Orders, see Revised I-10. On the night of a full moon, a small, vacuum-sealed package will be left in the Tuesday delivery. You are to take this package to the large tree stump behind room 12, 1 hour after sunset. Leave the package unopened on the stump. Do not wait to see what, if anything, happens to it. 11. If you find a book in a vacant room that has been left open, do not read the pages. Close the book immediately and place it on the small, empty bookshelf in the office. Do not attempt to read any book placed on that shelf. 12. Any personal item left behind by a guest must be considered contaminated. It cannot be kept. It cannot be discarded in the regular trash. You must take the item to the incinerator chute on the side of the maintenance shed before the next sunset. You do not need to enter the shed. The chute is accessible from the outside. Deposit the item and pull the lever. Do not look into the chute. I read Rule 12 3 times, the words blurring together. Any personal item left behind by a guest must be considered contaminated. My hand went to my pocket, my fingers closing around the smooth, warm wood of the little bird. It was no longer a talisman. It was a liability, a choice. The rule was clear. The consequence for failure, as stipulated in my contract, was also clear. But the thought of taking this small, innocent object, the only thing in this entire place that felt remotely human, and feeding it to a fiery, unknown furnace felt like a betrayal I wasn't sure I could commit. It was just a toy, a piece of wood. What harm could it do? I stood in the silent office, the weight of the tiny bird in my pocket feeling heavier than any book I ever shelved, any truth I had ever known. The sun was already beginning its slow descent towards the horizon. I had until sunset tomorrow. For the first time since I arrived, I considered breaking a rule. And for the first time, I was truly terrified of what would happen if I did. I made my choice in the quiet, lonely hours before dawn. I would not destroy the bird. It was a foolish, emotional decision, a rebellion born of desperation and a longing for something real. I took the small wooden carving from my pocket and hid it in my sock drawer, buried beneath the few meager possessions I had brought with me. It was my secret, my one deviation from the protocol, my one claim to the man I used to be. Samuel O'Connell, the librarian who loved his mother, was still here. He had not been entirely erased. The next day, the motel felt different. The change was subtle, a shift in the quality of the silence. It was no longer empty or watchful. It was accusatory. The ever-present scent of pine and ozone was sharper, tinged with something else, something acrid and sour, like spoiled meat. The coffee that morning was unbearably bitter, and I had to force it down, gagging with every swallow. The system knew. The motel knew I had disobeyed. As dusk fell, the real consequences began. I was in the office, trying to distract myself by raking the gravel, in the parking lot into perfect, obsessive lines when I saw her. The little girl from the minivan. She was standing at the far end of the lot, near the edge of the dark, impenetrable forest. She was just standing there, her small form a silhouette against the dying light, watching me. She wasn't wearing the clothes she'd had on before. She was in a simple white nightgown. My blood turned to ice. They had left that morning. I had watched them drive away. I blinked, expecting her to be a figment of my exhausted imagination, but she remained. Motionless, silent, staring. I retreated into the office, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and locked the door. I didn't look out the window again, but I could feel her gaze on me, a physical pressure against the walls. Later, after midnight had passed and the television was humming its static lullaby, a new sound began. It came from room 3. A soft, rhythmic thumping. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of something small and hard hitting the wall over and over. The wall that connected room 3 to room 4. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that it was the sound of a small wooden bird being tapped against the drywall. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't a harmless act of defiance. It was a fundamental disruption of the motel's delicate, terrifying ecosystem. The bird wasn't a keepsake, it was an anchor, and by keeping it, I had tethered a piece of that family, of that little girl, to this place. I had contaminated the system. I ran to my apartment, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open the sock drawer. I snatched the wooden bird. It was no longer warm. It was ice, cold to the touch, and it seemed to vibrate with a faint, malevolent energy. I had to fix this. I had to follow the rule. I burst out of the office and ran towards the maintenance shed at the end of the building, the cold gravel crunching under my feet. The little girl was gone from the edge of the parking lot, but the thumping from inside room 3 continued. Louder now, more insistent. The shed loomed before me, a dark, windowless block of concrete. Rule 6 screamed in my mind: never, under any circumstances, enter the locked maintenance shed. But Rule 12 offered a loophole. The incinerator chute was on the outside. I found it on the side of the building, a heavy iron flap with a thick lever next to it. It looked ancient. With trembling fingers, I lifted the flap. A wave of intense heat and the smell of ash and something else, something like burnt sugar and hair, washed over my face. Do not look into the chute. I squeezed my eyes shut, held the bird over the opening, and let it go. I heard a faint tink as it hit something far below. I slammed the flap shut and grabbed the lever. It was heavy and stiff, but with a surge of adrenaline, I pulled it down. There was a deep, grinding sound from within the shed, followed by a sudden, violent whoosh of air. Then, silence. The thumping from room 3 stopped. I stood there, gasping for breath in the cold night air, relief washing over me. I had fixed it. I had corrected my error. That was when the email arrived. My phone, which had been a dead brick since my arrival, chimed with a notification. It was from Mr. Sterling. The subject line was a single word: incomplete. The message was just one sentence. The contamination was not the object. It was the attachment. The shed requires a balancing of the scales. I stared at the words, the meaning crashing down on me with the force of a physical blow. The bird was just wood. The problem wasn't that I had kept it. The problem was why I had kept it. My sentimentality, my memory, my humanity, that was the contamination. The system had been corrupted by a piece of me, and now it demanded payment. I looked at the maintenance shed. The heavy, padlocked doors seemed to pulse with a dark energy. I understood now. Rule 6 wasn't a warning to protect me from what was inside the shed. It was to protect the shed from the manager. It was the final failsafe, and I had been instructed to bypass it. The padlock on the door wasn't locked. It hung open, waiting. My hand closed on the cold metal. This was the real job, the final clause in my contract. I pulled the door open. The inside was not a maintenance shed. It was a library. My library. Metal shelves stretched up into the darkness, but they weren't filled with books. They were filled with objects. A child's worn teddy bear. A single, elegant woman's glove. A tarnished silver locket. A pair of cracked eyeglasses. Each one sat alone on a shelf, faintly illuminated by a cold internal light. The things left behind. The contaminations. This was a catalog of broken rules, a museum of past failures. On a small metal plaque at the end of one aisle, I saw a name, A. Miller, Night Manager, 1998-2002. Below it sat a rusty harmonica. In the center of the room was a simple wooden table and a single chair. On the table was a small, ornate silver box. I knew what I had to do. The shed didn't want the bird. It wanted the feeling behind the bird. It wanted the anchor. It required a personal sacrifice to balance the scales. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the only personal item I carried with me. It was a worn, folded photograph of my mother, taken last summer. She was smiling, her eyes full of life, before the disease had begun to steal her from the world. It was the reason I was here. It was the source of my hope, my grief, my love. It was my most powerful attachment. It was the real contamination. My hands shook as I opened the silver box. It was empty, lined with black velvet. With a final, tearing sob, I placed the photograph inside and closed the lid. A soft click echoed in the silent room. The oppressive atmosphere in the shed instantly vanished, replaced by a neutral, sterile emptiness. The cold light emanating from the objects on the shelves faded into darkness. I walked out of the shed and back to the office. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the pines. On the polished counter, where the thermos of coffee usually sat, was a new, freshly laminated card. It was a single rule. 13. You are the night manager. You will ensure the smooth operation of the Pine Tree Rest. There are no other concerns. I picked it up. The name Samuel O'Connell felt like a word from a foreign language, a book I had read a long, long time ago. I no longer felt fear, or grief, or hope. I felt only a quiet, calm sense of purpose. I looked out the window at the raked gravel, the pristine rooms, the silent, waiting trees. Everything had a place, and there was a system for it. My place was here. I had a job to do, and the rules were very, very clear.